Okay, so we settled on some chords, as we do before the class happens. I think that one of the some of the defining factors that make tunes compelling for me, or like for a lot of people, but things that I really love about tunes are what we talked about last time, was that a tune could work at lots of different tempos. So like Haas's and the Canebrake is a great tune at like a groovy tempo, a medium tempo, or a fast tempo. Same thing. So this is a waltz, so we could do a slow waltz or a fast waltz. It's not so much about the tempo for this, but the other factor would be like so many great chord options. Like it doesn't always have to be the same. And I actually learned this tune from Darol Anger, and he taught me a different melody, and I actually know a different set of chords that kind of that match that melody. They're only like one or two notes apart, but they make a difference for the chord progression. And so Britt and I kind of worked on what we thought would be great chords for this particular melody and give you an idea of how to use them. So yeah, this is like a reason why I love this tune, is because there could be so many different great versions and great options with it for you to play around with. And when you're in a jam session, obviously whoever is like calling out the tune or leading the chords is probably going to say this is what they are. But if you're more in a performance setting, you could like have an opinion as far as like, these are the set of chords that we're going to use. And you might say the first time through we're going to use this set of chords, and the second time through we use this alternate set of chords. So but for today, let's use these chords that we worked out. And so okay, last week we talked a lot about like chord function and how to spell them. Last session, whatever. And so we're going to build upon that knowledge and not necessarily review that so much. We're just going to continue on from there. So in the first phrase, we have a G, D, G. And so that's 1, 5, 1 right off at the beginning. So we kind of worked on our go-to voicings for the chord G. We have the open G and D. And if you're feeling like you're moving past that voicing, you might try like maybe the B and the D as a G chord voicing. Give that a shot. There are 3 different times you play the G chord in this first phrase. So maybe play it a different way every time you play it. So maybe da-dum, ba-dum, all right, so that's giving you just a little bit of a difference. I played the open G and D. Then for the D chord, I put my first finger down on the G string, on the A. So I had the A and the D. And then since I'm going back to G, I added my second finger B. And I have that nice little movement of walking up the scale. So my chord part can kind of almost be like a counter melody almost. Or I'm thinking almost like in a bass way. So da-dum, ba-dum, up to B. And then for this other measure of G, you could stay on that, or you might walk down back to your original voicing that you had. So in our last session, we talked about how we're trying to be as creative as possible in our backup. Like we don't play the same backup every single time. And that's kind of the goal. It might not be what you need to work on all the time. Like you might need to work on making sure that you've got what the chord progression is and that you can play it accurately and rhythmically every time. But then once you're moving past that, these would be the goals, is to like find a different chord voicing and different rhythm. Okay, that's the end of my TED Talk for right now. We're going to keep going with the chords, but let's try the G, D, G any way you would like to voice that. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. All right, and then for the second phrase, we have 2 E minor chords, which is the 6th chord. We used that in Haas's last time as well. So you could play the E on the D string and the B on your G. And then we're going to go back to G, which is the G and the D. So those are your go-to voicings. But I think we could make it a little bit more interesting than that. So like, what if you played the E minor with the first chord with an E, the same E, and the open G for the first time. And then you add the B for the second measure. And then when we go to the G chord, you might keep that same B, but roll off to the open D. And then walk back down to the open G. So it was just E minor and just G, but I played both of those chords 2 different ways, so it makes 4 measures go by. So again, that was G and E, add my B, take the E off and get to D, and then roll the B down to G. So rhythmically, and after singing that with the melody, just so you know where my thought process is, and if I heard somebody playing that, I might realize like, oh, the melody was playing that same B. So maybe I don't want to play the B on the downbeat of the G chord. Maybe I'd prefer to play the open G at that point. So then I would reverse that maybe. So da, 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 just to make sure that I've got more harmonic information happening. I'm not trying to confuse you. I'm just trying to show you my thought process on why I might make one decision over the next. Kind of taste is one of the hardest things to teach as an educator, because both things are correct. You're playing 2 E minor chords and you're playing 2 G major chords, but when to play what. And so the reasoning behind why you might play one or the other would be listening to what's happening around you. Okay, so then the third phrase, guess what, is the same thing. 2 E minor chords, 2 G major chords. So I've already given you that information of how you want to play around with them. Maybe the first time through on the second phrase, you just play one voicing for two bars. So maybe like you could do something like that. Oh wait, we go to an E minor chord at the very end of the third phrase, don't we? Yeah, excuse me. I did practice this. There are so many options. Sorry. Okay, so in the third phrase, forgive me, instead of E minor, G, G, which is the second phrase, we're now going to go E minor, G, back to E minor. Okay, so we've got all of those chords. So let's practice measures 2 and 3, phrases 2 and 3. And so I'll call them out. You're starting on an E minor, whatever E minor voicing you'd like. So 2 bars of E minor. Ready, set, E minor. Another E minor. Here's G, 2, 3. Okay, phrase 3 starts on E minor again. Goes to G. Now back to E minor. Okay, so just those 2 chords. And then finally, when we get to the fourth phrase, we get to hear my favorite chord, the 4 chord. We get to hear the C, and then D, and back to G. 4, 5, 1. Folks, that's how we do it, okay? So there's 2 bars of 1. We've got 4, 5. Okay, so C, I didn't say it. C is the 4 chord, D we already know is the 5 chord, and then G is the 1 chord. Okay, Britt, do you want to work on some chords for the B part?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Okay, so we've got a lot of kind of foreshadowing with that hitting the E minor in the second and third phrases of the A part, and that's where we're going to start on the B part. Dee da 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 da. So it's basically backwards of the second phrase. 2 bars of E minor and then back to G. And now we have a 2 minor chord, which is A minor. So I usually just play it as a bar, barring the first finger on A and E. Because if you play... like that, it sounds like a C chord because the C's on the bottom. So, and it's kind of hard to play an A and a C at the same. Well, actually, you could do that, but I think that is enough in this moment. Because like sometimes you're like, you want to get the third in there because you want to make people know that it's a minor chord, but it doesn't sound like it could be a major chord. I mean, it could, but yeah, it's not. And then you return to the E minor. So it's almost like our home has kind of switched over to the relative minor in the B part. That the phrase ends there again. So let's do that first half of the B part. E minor, G, G, A minor, E minor, E minor. 1, 2, 3, here we go. Da 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 dee da 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 dee da 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 da. So you're really in the zone of the melody, but there's not a lot. I mean, you could jump up when the melody goes down, or if you wanted. But I don't really mind that kind of being in the same zone as the melody in that part. Okay, and then the second half of the B part. So, in the original version, there isn't that B minor chord, but we like that, and it's just lovely, and it's nice to have a variation as well. So we start the same way, 2 bars of E minor, and now we put a B minor chord. So it's like if we're now in the key of E minor, which we've sort of modulated to for this B part, this is our 5 chord. And I'm just playing that as a barred second finger, B and F sharp. And then you go down to the A minor, and then back to E, D. So yeah, you could, let's see. I guess I like playing the same voicing for the 2 bars that you get of most of these chords in the B part, because then you just really hear the movement of like, this is what the next chord is. And you could go up there instead of E, D, G. You could go E, D, G. Then you get your leading tone back to the A part. So I'll just keep going, Lauren, but feel free to jump in whenever you want. My kind of like go-to backup rhythm on a waltz is basically just pulsing the bow. So instead of doing only these long bows, dotted half notes, 3 beat. So 1 bow per bar, right? Da la di da 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 da. You could just do it really smooth and long like that, which I think is beautiful, and then it just really lets the melody speak, and the melody's providing the rhythm. Or you can add in a pulse on beats 2 and 3, so still the same length of each bow stroke, but so why don't we try that just to feel what that feels like? And you can really use your whole bow on this. It's a good exercise for getting to the tip. Okay, so try that out with your chord voicings and pulsing on 2 and 3. 1, 2, 3, ready, go. Da 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 da. the B part. Da, 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 dee, da, 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 dee, da. A minor. Da, 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 da. Back to the E minor. Da, 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 da. Stay on E minor. Dee, da, 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 da. B minor. Doo, dee, da, A minor. Da, da, dee, da, 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 to E to D. Back to G. Da, da, da. One more A part. Da, 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 dee, da, 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 da. Yeah, so you have time, I think, to think about what voicings you want to move through, which is a nice thing about this speed of tune and 3/4 and just the way that the chords kind of lay out. And also a 3-beat length of time is a good time to go dun 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 dun, which you can also obviously fit into 4/4, but this way, like if you're looking at the last 2 bars of the tune where it goes 5/1, you can just go. So you're moving on every single beat of the bar, getting yourself back to the G chord. Yeah, Lauren, other little tidbits to get in there chord wise?
I think in this kind of tune where there are a lot of the same chords over and over again, and there are things that are similar but yet they're kind of different, it can be challenging to memorize or really internalize the chord progression. And I know that we're just throwing this stuff at you guys, but I can see a lot of you are using the notation in front of you, which is totally valid for this kind of setting. I'm just pointing out that it's hard to move away from the paper. And like when we're in a jam setting or hopefully a performance setting, we are not having the paper in front of us. It's not like somebody calls Ookpik Waltz and then you go through your binder and you find that one, right? So it's like, how do we internalize something that has this many chord changes? And so one thing that I like to do, I really like, this is an old version of the chart that I'm holding up in front of you guys, but last time we had a request to put the chords on top of the melody, which I think is totally useful, and I love that. And I'm also a fan of just writing it out old school. You can't see this, but just like doing the chart this way, so you can see like where the chords line up and realize. So things that I'm noticing that I may not have noticed before, but would help me with memorizing and hearing it, is that in the A part, the third bar of each phrase is always the G chord. It's always 1. So like no matter what happens, I can always hear that I'm coming back to the 1 chord there. So if I'm putting on the play along track to hear what's happening and playing, like I try to hone in on just that one, like where that 1 chord is the anchor, and hit that 1 chord. The 1 chord might happen previously, like before that, but if I can just focus in on that 1 chord, so like something else, so noticing like, oh yeah, okay, that's an anchor. Like I can always come back to that. So even if I do a little flub, like that's my spot to get back on. And then noticing things that are really kind of more formulaic that happen in lots of tunes, like the fact that the first phrase is 1-5-1. That happens in so many waltzes. Okay, so no matter what key you're in, but hearing that dum, ba-da-dee-dum, ba, here's the G chord we talked about as an anchor. So we like, okay, I know the first phrase. I can really solidify that. And the fourth phrase being 4, 5, 1, ba-da-dum. So if you can really anchor on the first phrase, I'm kind of being like Vanna White right now, but if you could be the first phrase and be like, I know I've got the 1-5-1 situation happening. And in the fourth phrase, I've got 4-5-1 happening. And then I always know that the third bar is on a G chord. Like if you can really internalize that, then you can use your brain power to be like, okay, what's funky about this? Okay, what's funky is that in the A part, the second and the third phrases are the phrases that are pretty much the same, as opposed to 1 and 3. Like in the B part, 1 and 3 are the same, right? Melodically, anyway. And so if you can think about like, okay, I'm going to start on the E minor. I'm starting on the 6th chord, and then I hit the G. The only thing that we did as a funky little thing is that we went back to the E minor after the G chord, just to kind of like make it be different. It's the 3rd phrase as opposed to the 2nd phrase. So those are little things that you can pinpoint and be like, okay, that's what I need to focus on memorizing, because I can internalize the 1st phrase and the 4th phrase. And then in the B part, things to think about would be that like the 1st phrase and the 3rd phrase are the same melodically, and they start on the same chord harmonically. They both start on the E minor. And then they would normally go to the G, the 1 chord, and in the 3rd phrase, we plugged in the B minor chord. And the reason why we could do that, Britt said the B minor functions as the 5 chord because we're kind of living in E minor in the B part, but also G, B, D is how we spell a G chord. And then B, D, F sharp is B minor. So they share 2 notes. So they're not that far away. So remember when I told you like to use the different voicing in the G chord of using a B and a D for the G chord? If you do that, you're set for both the G major chord or the B minor chord. So just kind of noticing things in a kind of like in a square pattern of like what lines up, what's the same, what's different, can be helpful for memorizing chord progressions. And then once you've really memorized them, that's when it can be more fun to play around with them and come up with more stuff. Okay, so Britt.
Yeah. I'll just one quick note. Because I think everything Lauren said is really, really good and really helpful in your process for kind of internalizing this stuff, like looking at the form, like whether you're a visual or not, but just being like, okay, I've got these 4-bar phrase chunks, and like this is how they lay out with the G chord on the 3rd bar or whatever. I think you can also get a lot of this by just really like hearing it and like even like messing around and finding what sounds right. Like I think you'll arrive at that same place, and maybe a combination of the two is a good approach, because the melody kind of shows you, or like if there's somebody playing a guitar, you'll hear if you're having a rub against it. And a lot of these chords have such overlapping notes anyways that it's not going to sound that bad if you just play a G chord the whole time, you know? Da, da, dee, da. Like, because like those notes are all basically in there. It's in the scale, right? And it was recommended to me a long time ago to pick up a chordal instrument, and I do think that was helpful. I don't think it's totally necessary, because the fiddle can be that as well. And sometimes like treating it more like as a mandolin can be helpful to hear the full, you know, more than 2 chords. I mean, more than 2 notes at the same time. Da, 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 da. You know, like kind of arpeggiating so that you just like hear it and you know every note that works over a given moment in the tune.
Yeah. I want us to play. There was a question about bow pulsing, but I'm really glad that I just want to tag on to one thing that Britt said was that, and I was thinking of it exactly the same time you said it, Britt, was that there are so many overlapping notes in this tune. I mean, and that's why we could come up with like, well, what chords do we want to play on this tune? And that's because like the G and the B are in the G chord and the E minor chord. And then the C and the E are in the C chord and the A minor chord. And like, yeah, there's just like so much overlapping. So chances are like if you play a note that's not in the actual chord, but it's an overlap of the other one, it's just going to sound like you have like a great extension. Like maybe you're playing the 7 of the chord or something like that. So really don't be afraid to just go for it and see what you like the sound of, to play around with it. So maybe we can talk about bow pulsing, because that was a question, and it would be great for us to just like what if we did some bow pulsing and then go into playing through 2 A's and 2 B's of the chords after that? So you can practice finding as many voicings or just hanging on a G chord and seeing what you like that sound of, and maybe focusing on your pulse. See whatever, it's the whole choose your own adventure thing, right? Of creative jam skills, is that we want to make sure that you are inspired, and whatever is motivating you to be creative, like, go in that direction. I just think that as far as like city planning goes, you don't want to have like a skyscraper next to like a 1-story building, right? So like if you're really interested in rhythm, like go there, but make sure you come back and do some extra voices of your chords. Or if you really like voices, make sure you don't forget about the rhythm. Just like get everything growing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'll just try to tell you this. The simplest version of what I'm doing is basically taking the 2 string voicings, and then there's a few different ways you can do it, but let's start by playing on both strings. So your bow is at an angle that you're evenly between your G and your D strings, right? And then on a down bow, you start at the frog, and then when you get to beat 2, you give it a little push. So it's kind of like down with the hand, like it's like an accent, but you can also move down, like down this way and down that way. So an accent and a little bit of a speed up of the bow. And then I do it again on the 3rd beat. So try that on the down bow. And then try it on the up bow. And you can play around with this. It can be keeping your bow at that exact same angle as you pull it down, or you can have it be more of a rock where your arm is actually doing this. So on the strong beats 1, 2, and 3, you are going down a little bit, so you're grabbing the higher string on 1, 2, 3. Okay, try that again. And it's not like that. It's way more like smooth. Like you're not really worried about exactly what string you're playing at the given time. You're just trying to get that straight rhythm in there. So really hitting it on the beat. It's great to practice this with the metronome. This also works in 4/4. 1, 2, 3, 4. But yeah. And you could do it on any strings. And you could also get the same effect. It's not going to sound exactly the same, but instead of doing these long 3-beat bows, you could go. In fact, let's try that. So down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. So it's going to be just a 1-bar pattern. So you're always on a down bow on the down beat. Sorry, I won't put the chords in now. Just do the bowing. Ready, set, go. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down. So that's another option to give you that same pulsing feeling of hitting each beat as it comes.
And that gets the 8th note in there too for the and of 3. 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and so
little light
nice
swing.
to add some more subdivision in there.
Totally.
Do you increase bow pressure and speed at the precise same motion?
I would say yes. It's subtle. You can play around with it and see exactly how much you want to do. Like it's not a huge speed up of the bow. Like I'd say I'm maybe crossing like 2 inches of bow. But yeah, just try to get it right on the beat.
I think another way to think about it would be that it's just that you're not stopping your bow. Like you could even start by not thinking about having to increase the speed, but just the fact that you're not stopping. So we're not going right, which is somewhat of a more classical thing, but your bow is still dragging or pushing in whatever direction you were going in. So yeah, but I'm not saying that you're not adding speed, but as long as you can think about still pushing in the same direction while you're adding in the pulse with the downward pressure of either your index finger or even just your hand and your elbow rocking it, just keep the direction of the bow. If you're going down, keep going down while you pulse. If you're going up, keep going up while you pulse. Don't let the bow direction stop between the pulsing.
Yeah, and Lauren just mentioned this, but I was going to say, yeah, like the way that you get that accent it can be variable. Whether it's like just the index finger putting a little extra pressure in that direction, or if it's the whole hand kind of like tensing momentarily. Tension is bad, but you can use it briefly.
Maybe it's just more weight. It's just more weight, somewhat. Mm-hmm. As opposed to thinking that you have to be tense.
Yeah, and so with this, now that we're subdividing, we've got each beat going. We don't have to stay on the same notes on each beat of each bar. You know, you could go. Play around with that. It doesn't have to be double stops. It could just be single note kind of bass line things. So maybe we could try messing around with that and just do it together, even though you're going to be doing different things than what you're hearing me do. But it'll be just to kind of free yourself up in terms of moving your left hand while the chords are coming. Do you think that's a good idea to try that? Okay. Okay, so take it from the top. And if it helps you to look at the chord chart, I actually have it pulled up because I don't want to mess up the chords and confuse anybody, and my memory is kind of bad with this stuff. So feel free to do that if that helps. Okay, 1, 2, 3, ready, go. G. The B part. So yeah, feel free to kind of explore the whole range. You can think about kind of like when the melody goes up, you can go down. When the melody goes down, you could go up. But yeah, you kind of have free reign of the whole instrument and, you know, the pulsing, the bowing, the walking bass line kind of ideas. sometimes instead of the like staying in the same zone for that pattern, kind of like taking this axis into account more and almost mimicking like what a guitar would be doing, like boom chuck chuck, where it's low high high. Things like that. Yeah.
And that's where the knowing your fingerboard and knowing your arpeggios and all the different voicings really come in handy. And so like right now when we've been working on the chords and the chord voicings, we've kind of been sticking to the G and the D string, but recognizing that like playing the chords all over your fingerboard on the D and the A, and then the A and the E are going to help you add double stops into your melody, but also to think more across your fingerboard while you're playing backup is really much more fun than just sticking to two strings. If you have a lot of fiddle players, it's good to potentially stick to two strings so you're not like fighting each other. I know that when we were in Republic of Strings, like Darol would assign us like you're sticking on your C and your G string, so I can be on the G and the D or the D and the A, and we'd kind of have zones where it was like we can play backup and we can play whatever we want, but you've got to be in that register on those two strings. So yeah. Okay, so there was a question, is there unusual for a tune to end on a different chord than its key signature?
So it actually doesn't, because the form is AABA, so you actually are ending on a G chord. But this tune, because the B part is kind of changing key center, you are heavily also in E minor, so it could make sense to end there. Yeah. And one cool thing, I don't know if we're going to like actually get into talking about these alt chords. Maybe we will, because we have 30 more minutes. I like this idea of Lauren's, which you'll see in the second to last bar of the A section. It's written as G over E, G/E. And I
don't know if they see that. I don't think they have the alternate chords in front of them.
Oh, okay. That didn't get sent out at all.
It did? Oh, it did.
I don't know.
Awesome.
Okay. I thought it was.
Okay, sweet.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so that just means that it's a G chord on top. Like if you kind of imagine your chord visually, like these are the notes of the chord, like, or this is a guitar strumming or whatever. Like you have the G chord is up here, and then on the bottom as the bass note you have an E. So it's kind of like combining E minor and G, like hearing both of those things at once. So it's a cool way to kind of have it almost be a G chord, but you're hearing it differently because it's stacked over the E note. And then that gives you variety in those last two bars.